Thank you for staying with us. For our first interview, we'll be talking to the Fire Service Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and on Zoom, joining us to speak more about the bushfires, fire safety, fire prevention, is Leo Ramkissoon. He's the president of the Fire Service Association. Thank you, Mr. Ramkissoon, for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Dominique, and good morning to all your viewers. Good morning to Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. So we want to get straight into it. Now, for anyone who's driving across the country on the weekend or during the week, we have been seeing a lot of bushfires. We've been seeing a lot of bushfires, sometimes close to electrical lines, sometimes really close to the road. Could you give us an update on this, on how the fire service is maneuvering all of this? Because it seems to be popping up all over the place.
Well, it's a yearly phenomena that we go through every year. You have a spike in the occurrence of bushfires and rubbish heap fires and so on that pop up. And the fire service have to rise to the occasion and deal with it. And of course, we would, expect that the population engage in safety and preventative measures to reduce the occurrence of bushfires and the damage that it causes to property, the environment, and even to life and limb as well from time to time. Right. So yes, we, as the fire service, we would encounter no less than about 3,000 to 4,000 bushfire emergency calls each year. And the bushfire season, as we all should be aware, is dry season. It begins from December and ends in June of any given year. Mm-hmm. So we are definitely in the middle of the bushfire season. And as the months progress, you may find the bushfires intensifying because you have a minimal amount of rainfall and more dry, hot weather. Mm-hmm. So the vegetation around is drying out and it is rife for the occurrence of these bushfires and so on. So when persons discard cigarettes or they light fires outdoors and, you don't ensure that it's put out and so on, all of these things may contribute to the igniting or the starting of these fires. And we tend to underestimate the speed with which these fires could get out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, but I'm glad you mentioned that about lighting fires outdoors. What is the procedure? Because a permit is needed in these cases, right?
Yes. According to the Agricultural Fires Act, Section 18, it lays out the procedure for the acquisition of a fire permit. It is unlawful to light fires outdoors during the bushfire season. And in fact, the legislators have addressed the fines and the penalties that persons who break that law could be subject to. So you could find yourself having to pay a $20,000 fine and possibly a year or so imprisonment. So I would discourage persons. I would try to dissuade the population as much as possible. Try to avoid lighting fires outdoors as much as possible during this period. But if you must, you ought to go to the nearest fire station and make an application for a fire permit. Is still only $10. Okay. Probably the legislators need to look at that as well. But it's quite easy. And what will happen is that the fire guardian or fire personnel will visit your property or wherever the fire is to be lit. Mm-hmm. And they outline guidelines for you to observe and to engage in order to safely undertake whatever process you are engaged with to light that fire.
Right. In terms of, bushfires and so on, and a fire that may start close to home, in those cases where it's very close to home or close to electrical lines, what is the procedure? What does the fire service advise happen? Whether it's persons vacating the space or, calling immediately, what do you suggest that they do?
Well, the first thing you do, if a fire is encroaching your home, call 990. Mm-hmm. Call the fire service immediately. I would advise the fire service, usually we would advise as general guidelines, turn off all gas and electrical supplies at home, all gas and so on, and go to the kitchen, take off the gas tank, all of those things. Close all doors. People take for granted that if your home becomes involved in a fire, when the doors in your home are open, it makes a much easier way for the fire to spread throughout the home than when the door is closed. When the door is closed, it kind of assists in confining the fire to one area. So that assists. So we would advise close all doors, close all windows. That's an entry point. Block all gaps. You could use a towel where there are spaces and gaps in doors, a wet towel or so, and block those exits and entrances and so on. Move all flammable curtains away from windows, evacuate as quickly as possible. And we will advise when you do evacuate, notify a neighbor or some authority where you can be found so that we could account for you when we do get there to engage in firefighting.
Okay. All right. Now, we have seen cases where there have been, loss of homes. So you may see in the reports, 11 lose home because of fire and so on. In these cases, most times, what is the cause of the fire? Is it an electrical cause? Is it by negligence? What can you tell us about those things?
Well, Dominic, during this season, as I told you, you would have a high level of these fires occurring, right? I want you to imagine as fire officers, when you go to work for your 9 or 15-hour duty, you would probably be required to respond to 10 to 15 fires or so. And when you go to these fires and you engage in firefighting, in order for you to determine exactly what caused the fire, it will require some type of investigation.
Okay.
In circumstances, it's it is difficult for the fire officer on the scene without having done a full-out investigation to come to a conclusion as to what causes the fires. What we do know is that because the environment is very, very inviting for fires to occur, that there is the possibility of spontaneous combustion, where you have, just a piece of glass that the sun may, reflect through and magnify and cause a fire to ignite. I'm just putting out there that there are various ways that fire can be lit, whether deliberately or by an act of God or so. So the point is that we have to make preparation and expect that fires will occur. So in those circumstances, what we invite and ask people to do is regularly clean leaves and, from your gutters, usually leaves and so on build up in your gutters. And when the dry season comes, it is very, very combustible. So fires could start there if, a loose ember from a cigarette, for example, gets the heat, keep wood piles and other flammable materials well away and covered from your home. Keep grass and bush around your home minimal, cut it, keep it low. Establish at least approximately 10-meter trace away from any vegetation and so on that is immediately outside the perimeter of your home. And again, in case of fires, call 990 if you see anything that could occur. The point is, when you have, during the wet season, a proliferation of bush and so on growing around, when the dry season comes, that now becomes food for that fire. So what you should do is clean around the home as much as possible, keep the combustible materials away from your home and secure, so that your property remains relatively safe when the fires do occur.
Okay, thank you for those tips. And before we wrap up, if you can give us any updates on wage negotiations within the service.
Right, so as you may be aware, the wage negotiation has been placed before the courts. Yes. So the state has filed a dispute, right? The state having offered 4% and unwilling to negotiate any further. So we are mounting our defense. we are going to the courts, and we have prepared as much as we can, and we continue to do so. Our membership, just on Saturday, we met, and our membership again stands firm in the position that we reject the 4%.
Okay.
And we have put forward as best a case as possible to convince the court. I wouldn't want to engage in too in-depth discussion,
Yes,
because
understood.
we don't want this to breach the sub judice principle that, when a matter is before the court. But, it is a bit saddening that the state would have filed the matter after just 3 sittings. I have sat as the negotiator for the fire service for many years, and involved in several negotiations. And this is the first time I'm seeing the process being truncated so early. It's as if there is a zealousness to place this matter before the court, with the hope that the court would find favor with the state, and would treat with fire officers in a manner that we may not be happy with. But nonetheless, we are preparing, and we don't want it to be said that in any event, that any eventuality would have been at the cause of the Fire Service Association being unprepared. So we are doing all that we can to rectify the situation, especially given the circumstances where fire officers are operating in less than perfect conditions, very, very deplorable conditions fire officers are operating in, risking their lives and giving up a big portion of their health to perform their duties, and now having to battle with the employer to establish that we ought to be rewarded with a little more than $200 increase in salary for a 6-year period, in fact a 9-year period, because it's 9 years since the last negotiation. So it's really,
because my next question was going to be, you mentioned how much fires you would usually have to deal with, especially in the dry season. Does the fire service have the resources to do this, both the manpower and also the utility needed to fight these fires?
You see, that question, for me to come and conclusively say that we don't have, I wouldn't say that, because as fire officers, we have to make do with what we have.
Right.
So although ideally we should have all 11 stations in the Northern Division, this morning as we rise, we know that we have only 5 stations, and 6 stations are out of compliance because there is no truck there to respond to the public.
Okay.
So we can't sit down here and say, well, we don't have the resources. We'll have to make it do. But I want you to know that is placing an enormous burden on fire officers. It is stretching fire officers, because aside from us not having the equipment that we ought to have to really be able to respond to the public, the personal protective equipment is almost absent. It's totally short. Those are the breathing apparatus sets and so on. So what you find is that officers are breathing in smoke right through the day, when we ought to have the breathing apparatus set that could allow us to enter into smoke-filled environments without having to breathe that smoke, and be able to engage in firefighting and rescue persons. So those conditions, and this is happening throughout Trinidad and Tobago, Southern Division, Central Division, all of these areas, Tobago, all of these areas are subject to the same high intensity of bushfires and so on. So that without the personal protective equipment and poor working conditions, poor and defective fire trucks, fire officers are really, really in a terrible place. So I want to use this opportunity once again to call on the powers that be, that being the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of National Security, the Minister of National Security as well. We have been writing to them. We have been pleading with them to, meet with us and to, allow for us to follow up on the acquisition of breathing apparatus sets, the acquisition of trucks, the acquisition of firefighting clothing, the acquisition of health and safety measures to protect fire officers, the conditions of fire stations, the health and safety conditions in general. So we are not getting the required attention being paid to the fire service. So we are pleading. We are pleading with the authorities. At this stage, we're calling on the Prime Minister to intervene. However else we could get this issue rectified, it really needs the attention of all. We also call all members of the public to join with us, to call on your MP, call on whoever it is, to really emphasize on them that we need everybody, assistance. We need all hands on deck to really address these problems.
Yes. Okay. Well, we're going to keep in touch with you, to be able to check in on both the wage negotiations, which is before the court, and also on the improvements within the service for the fire officers as well for the public. Thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate you. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we have lots more in store for you. Stay with us.